Morning, everybody. How's it going? What's so funny? Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everybody. No kids at the Sunday school? Who's that? So did you? That sounds about right. Well, good to have everybody here for Bible study. No, any interesting events or things to share from your spring break? Did anyone travel somewhere that was neat? Yes, where'd you go? You took Aaliyah to Walla Walla. What's there to do in Walla Walla? Okay. Good architecture, wine tasting. I don't think Aaliyah, though, she couldn't do too much of that. Fort Walla Walla. That's where that one missionary guy set up camp. What's his name? State Prison, yep. Onions? Okay, good. Yeah. Anybody else go somewhere that you enjoyed? You enjoyed being home, good. All right, well, we'll get going here. Today is, we're going to be talking about something that maybe you don't see this referenced, but if you listen to the right Christian radio stations or if you went to the right churches, you'd hear this talked about quite a bit, because we're talking about the war between Iran and Russia. Or at least that's how people often interpret this chapter. Actually, I don't think it is including Russia at all, but a lot of people take it to mean that. And it does definitely mention Persia. So here we have what some people consider very relevant part of Scripture for today. Now, I'll just read the first couple verses, and then I want to... What I did is I went through a whole bunch of different study Bibles and then kind of combined and condensed their notes into this. And I think the best way to approach these chapters might be to just read the summary of them and then look at the chapters after you just get a chance to look at the beginning. So it starts out Ezekiel chapter 38. I'll pray now that everybody's seated and ready here. Lord, thank you for another day and another chance to study your word. And as this passage on the one hand is so often misused, but on the other hand has such encouragement for us, help us to find the encouragement in it for our times so that we'd have confidence no matter what we face, and also help us to recognize error so that we're not confused by it. And we ask your blessing and your presence now through Jesus' name and promise. Amen. So Ezekiel chapter 38 says, "The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I am against you." And he goes on and on. Now, the main question about this whole chapter that isn't actually that important, I think, in the end, but this is where people get off on weird tangents and misinterpretations. Who is Gog of the land of Magog? Just as a Bible reader, assuming you haven't looked at this, anything come to mind? Can you think of other times that the Bible refers to Gog? Or Magog? Gog sounds like a person, right? Gog of the land of Magog. Unless it's a city, which is also possible. But no, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So Gog from the land of Magog, he's a prince of Meshech and Tubal. Meshech and Tubal do show up a few other times in the Bible. But so no one even, when you hear that, do you even have like an instinct, a knee-jerk reaction, as they say, just you immediately think of something, or it's just kind of a total blank? Nothing. Okay, well, that's fine. And I was just making sure, but that's the normal reaction. What is this Gog and Magog? Nobody knows. It's not mentioned in Scripture. I think there is another guy with the name Gog mentioned in some genealogy and chronicles, but it's clearly not the same guy. So it's just this mystery place. And he's going to go on to talk about this alliance that Gog has with all these other nations against Israel. And it's going to talk about a great battle that's going to be fought. Before we even get there, anyone want to guess what happens in this great battle?
They lose.
Yeah, they lose. When you fight against God, you don't win. So you already kind of know this is the basic story of what we're going to see in these chapters. But the reason that there has been some confusion about it, well, you know what? I'll save that to the end. So now turn to the Bible study handout, and I'm just going to read this and pause for questions. I think that's the best way to make sure we understand it rather than trying to do this inductively. I'll do it deductively. So Ezekiel 38 to 39 presents a unified prophecy of a final attack on God's people and God's decisive response. The focus is not on identifying one historical enemy, but on showing God's absolute sovereignty. Even the attack itself unfolds under his control, where he talks about how he is the one guiding it. Gog of the land of Magog remains intentionally unclear. So in other words, if God wanted us to know a specific person, he could have very easily made that more clear. He does that in other parts of Scripture. He prophesies Cyrus in the book of Isaiah, way before Cyrus is on the scene. But he doesn't. He uses this name, Gog. Now, some connect it to Gyges of Lydia, who lived in Asia Minor before that, and his name was Gugu. So you can see how you'd get Gog from Gugu, and in Akkadian, Maggugu or Matgugu, Magog would be the land of Gugu. So that's possible. Well, no, it sounds ridiculous because Gugu to us is a baby term. But there was a real guy with this name. Yeah, there was a guy, yeah, it was. I mean, yes, it does sound silly to us. But Gyges, okay, but the way they wrote Gyges in Akkadian was Gug. But they always put u at the end of a noun, so it would be Gugu. Anyway, so it's possible. Others, ancient Jewish sources like Josephus, associate Magog with the Scythians, peoples north of the Black and Caspian Seas. Scripture itself does not fix the identity. The lack of clarity appears deliberate. Gog represents a future, still unknown enemy leader, and that's the part in bold. We don't know him. It's supposed to be a mystery, not one tied to a single historical figure. This is reinforced by the time language in the latter years and in the latter days. So maybe he's based off of this Gyges, but it's clearly not saying that it is him. So the nations listed form a deliberate geographical spread. So from the north come Meshech and Tubal, who were people who traded slaves and bronze, along with Gomer and Beth Targama. And we'll see them in a minute. So these are all located in Asia Minor and beyond and associated with distinct northern regions. The phrase, the uttermost parts of the earth, emphasize the distance rather than a precise modern identification. So we're going to see people coming from all over the world, from the farthest parts of the world, for this battle. And some of them are going to come from the north, and then we're going to see from the south and east come Persia, Cush, and Put. And these are more well known. We know kind of exactly where these areas were, representing Iran, regions south of Egypt, and North Africa. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish stand aside and asked, "Have you come to seize spoil?" functioning as observers rather than participants. Together, these names depict enemies coming from all sides. The point is not precision geography, but a scope, a universal opposition to God's people. So we're going to see all these different nations from way north, from way south, coming together to attack Israel. That's what we're going to get so far. And not the normal enemies of Israel. That's what's kind of different about this chapter. Usually it's Edom, it's Moab, it's the Philistines, Assyrians, Babylonians. None of the traditional enemies are mentioned. It's all these far away, less common enemies. Even Persia, they're never really the enemy. They're the people who restore and send the Israelites back. So, and places that aren't mentioned very much in the Bible. The setting is important. So Israel is described as a land of unwalled villages living securely, a restored people at peace. The security does not mean the absence of danger, but rests on the relationship between God and his people. So that's why they're secure, because God is taking care of them. How can they be secure without walled cities, in other words? Well, because God is watching out for them. The land is also called the center, the Hebrew word is navel, of the earth. So emphasizing its theological significance as the focal point of God's work. And so Gog plans an attack for plunder, yet remains fully under God's control. And so the attention is important. Gog is responsible for his intent, but God governs the outcome. When the invasion comes, it is overwhelming. It is like a cloud covering the land. The response is entirely God's. So the people of Israel don't even do anything. They just sit there. In my jealousy and blazing wrath, there shall be a great earthquake. The mountains shall be thrown down. And God sends pestilence, torrential rains, and hailstones, fire and sulfur. These cosmic disturbances echo earlier prophetic descriptions and show that the battle belongs to God alone. And Revelation later draws on the same imagery. And we do get Gog and Magog coming up again in the book of Revelation. And the defeat is total. And maybe I don't even have to read that. Just all totally destroyed. The birds of prey and beasts of the field are feasting upon the dead bodies of the people who attacked God's people. And they burn up, I'm summarizing, they burn up their weapons, and it's totally done. And they have a burial place for everybody called the Valley of Hamon Gog, which means the valley of the big crowds of Gog. And so there you go. Skip down, it says at the bottom, in summary, Ezekiel uses real nations and recognizable geography with a few mysteries to describe something larger than any single historical event. A future enemy not yet identifiable gathers a worldwide force against a restored and peaceful people. God himself draws that enemy in, defeats him completely, exposes his glory to all nations, explains his past judgment, and brings his people to final restoration. So that's what we'll get over this, the 2 chapters. I thought it was good to have an overview first. Already, maybe you can see why it's tempting for people who are dispensationalists to read that, modern things into that. What about that is appealing to somebody who wants to look at modern headlines and find them in the Bible?
That's what we're finding out on YouTube. They got a whole
All over YouTube, yeah. Just in case we don't get to it, I have 2 maps on the back page. These are just 2 that I found of the many on the internet. I couldn't find a good map. These are horrible maps. Like the identification, some of the places are right, some of them are way, way wrong. And there's so many different, and if you look at them, you see how they disagree. There's some things that are kind of in the same area, and then others that are in different areas. People just make stuff up. I mean, they really do. They're just, okay, well that Rosh, I'll get into that later, Rosh might be right there. There's a Hebrew word Rosh that means head or prince, but Rosh sounds kind of like Russia, the country of Russia. Well, David Jeremiah, and I know some people who have a high degree of respect for David Jeremiah, say that Rosh, even though in the rest of the Bible it's a word that means head or prince, here it's a country and it means Russia. And he also says that Gomer kind of sounds like Germany. And so Gomer is probably over in Germany. So you just have all sorts of wild, I mean, it's not good practice to say an ancient Hebrew word sounds similar to an English word today, and so that's probably what it is. But you really have people doing that online, people going crazy with this stuff. So those are 2 maps, but don't use either of them. I couldn't find a good one, and I didn't want to make one. So I just put 2 bad ones up there. Yes? Mean this, when they were never... Oh, and yeah, significant to the verses and the chapter numbers. It must be, yeah. So there's a lot of weird stuff attached to it. But now as we get into it, we can ask, all right, if we kind of dismiss those readings, what is the message that we should take away? And so now I'll kind of go through it. So he said, I'll start again. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And yeah, that's where you get the footnote that says Prince of Rosh, because some people really want there to be a land called Rosh. But Rosh is one of the first Hebrew words that you learn. It means head, or prince, or chief. So it's really silly that they even put that in a footnote here. But I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Now those seem to be kind of Asia Minor. That's why I think there could be something to the Gyges connection, because he was a king in Asia Minor, and it seems like Gog and Magog are, since it's connected to Meshech and Tubal, they're kind of in that Asia Minor area. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaw, and bring you out with your whole army. Your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets. Also Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, and many nations with you. Okay, so who is instigating this battle? Did you catch that? It does say. Yeah, God himself. He is against him, and so he's going to turn him around, put hooks in his jaw, and bring him out. That is not language of giving somebody a choice or somebody's free agency. That's the language of a hook is in your jaw, you are my beast, and I control you. That's what's being pictured here. So it's maybe different than our expectations and different than other prophecies. This Gog is being used by God. And this whole thing is not to be seen so much as a threat to Israel as it is a punishment on Gog. And you've got this alliance of all these nations that we already talked about, some from the north, and some from the south, the east, kind of from the west, although directly west there's just ocean, so northwest or southwest. Okay, so, and Gog doesn't have a choice. The Lord's bringing him out. Verse 7, get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gathered about you, and take command of them. After many days you will be called to arms. In future years you will invade a land that have recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They had been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. You and all your troops and the many nations with you will go up, advancing like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land. Okay, now, you can see why people connect this to modern Israel, right? What is the connection that they see in that paragraph? Yeah, all the surrounding nations are gathering against them, and it's saying Israel has been repopulated after they were spread to the nations. So that's, and you can see why they make that connection. However, in Ezekiel's context, what would his audience and, the next couple generations, when they were reading this prophecy, what would they have thought about when it talked about the nations, the Israelites being spread to the nations and being gathered back to the land of Israel? Yeah. So there was an exile, and there was this time when all the Israelites came back to the land of Israel. It's happened, I guess you'd say, twice in human history. Is that right? I can't think of a third. Yeah. So all the stuff in the Bible is about the first time it happened. But it did happen again, only it happened in a secular way and in a way not connected with, God and his promises. And so modern people look at that second, the modern Israel, but Ezekiel's talking about that first exile, when they will come back from there. Because he's talking to people living in exile. So for them, this is an encouragement. Oh, good, we're eventually going to go home. But when we go home, we're still going to face dangers. And that's what this chapter is about. So then he continues in verse 10. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. So it's like God is directing his thoughts. God is making all of this happen. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living in the center of the land, which could also, says literally, the navel of the earth. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all her villages will say to you, have you come to plunder? Have you gathered your hordes to loot, to carry off silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, and to seize much plunder? So what's the purpose of this war, of this attack?
Restocking?
Yeah, restocking supplies, getting loot. It's different from other prophecies about battles and things like this. Can you think of anything that's a little different about it? Maybe. We've looked at some of these earlier in Ezekiel. Most of the time, the focus is when God prophesies some disaster, the focus is on the Israelites. And the focus is on their sin and their idolatry and God's anger. And here, none of that has been mentioned so far. It's just about, you've got this big king who's going to invade with a big force, and they're going to loot and plunder. That's really it so far. And poor Israel is just sitting there with no one to protect them. Except we know actually they're secure because God is protecting them. All right, so verse 14. Therefore, Son of man, prophesy and say to Gog, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In that day, when my people Israel are living in safety, will you not take notice of it? You will come from your place in the far north, you and many nations with you, all of them riding on horses, a great horde, a mighty army. You will advance against my people Israel like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, Gog, I will bring you against my land so that the nations may know me when I am proved holy through you before their eyes. So why is God going to do this? To show off. To show his holy. And when God shows off, it's not a bad thing. It's bad for us. But he's showing his glory. He's showing his holiness. He wants the world to see it. So that's why he's got this huge army that he's going to defeat. Now on to 17. This is what the sovereign Lord says. You are the one I spoke of in former days by my servants, the prophets of Israel. At that time they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them. This is what will happen in that day. Okay, now that verse, any thoughts on what he's talking about there? That is kind of that's one of the more difficult verses to interpret, no matter how exactly you view this chapter. He's talking.
He's not talking about the Philistines and all that. He's talking about a different group now.
Yeah, but he says, you're the one I spoke of in former days by my servants the prophets. At that time they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them. So they've never mentioned Gog. We just said we've never heard of Gog before, but he's saying they've always been talking about you, Gog. It's kind of a weird thing to say. Yeah. It kind of does. That it basically just stands for the enemy of God's people. I mean, that seems to be what it is. That ultimately it's not about, there's not one nation in particular that is the enemy. It's just the nations in general who are the unconverted oppose God's people. And we see that in Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage and the people conspire in vain? So that the world is set up against God and set up against God's people. So it must mean something like that because there's no other reference to Gog in the prophets. But that is kind of a weird line, but your instinct seems to be the only way to take it that makes sense. But then verse 18, this is what will happen in that day. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will execute judgment on him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on him, and on his troops, and on the many nations with him. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Okay. Well, how would you summarize that? It sounds like Judgment Day. Yeah, I mean, total destruction and annihilation of everything. You can't top this rhetoric. If somebody, this is about the worst description of a defeat you could get. It kind of makes me laugh. Even the fish in the sea are shaking with terror. I mean, that's a serious earthquake here. So just overwhelming destruction. The fury of God's wrath. So yeah, it does kind of sound like Judgment Day. Yeah, shock and awe kind of is. So, and you can see why people make connections. They say, look, modern warfare, we've got these weapons that they didn't have back then. that this is how it would appear to them, a nuclear bomb or something like that. You see, why people would make these connections. And, well, you got nations from far away. Well, these days you do have United Nations and groups like that. So you can understand why people make these connections. But the point here just seems to be to describe this huge army that's just evil, and God's going to bring a terrible destruction on them just to show his glory, just to show that he can. And that even the strongest, most powerful nations have nothing, that can stand God. They're nothing compared to him. I don't know, imagine you're in Ezekiel's audience's situation. What comfort do you derive from this? What encouragement? You're in exile in Babylon. You're sitting there by the banks of the river. Babylon isn't mentioned, which is interesting. And this is talking about a future time. But what comfort or encouragement does this give you? Yeah. God is sovereign. So that's driven home. Any other encouragement you get from this, or knowledge or insight? I mean, we listen to this and kind of scratch our heads, and I'm sure they did too. Besides his sovereignty, is there anything we see about God? Mm-hmm. His hatred of evil. Yeah, I think we see that too. These evil nations that are just all about plundering, he's going to punish them. Yeah. Yeah. He is in charge, and so we don't need to worry about being in charge. Yeah. One thing I think about is, you see all these huge, terrible things happening in our day and all throughout history, and sometimes God might just be taking a nation and bringing them out for judgment, just to show the world that evil doesn't triumph. I mean, think about some of the great events in the last century, and some of the huge nations that seemed to be like they were going to take over the world, and then they didn't, and they collapsed. And that's God's judgment. God will, he doesn't allow evil to rule and dominate. He allows them for a time to succeed, but then he always brings them to their judgment. So there's a lot you could get from this, but there's still another chapter of it. So let's keep going. Chapter 39. Son of man, prophesy against Gog and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around and drag you along. I will bring you from the far north and send you against the mountains of Israel. Now that's a reason some people think it's Russia, because the farthest north would be Russia. So you can start to see these connections. To them, did the Israelites know about Russia? They probably knew that there were distant lands, but they didn't know much about it. Also, modern Russia, of course, didn't exist. There were people up there. I don't even know who, if they were genetically connected to modern day Russians. But anyway, people from the far north, and send you against the mountains of Israel. Then I will strike your bow from your left hand and make your arrows drop from your right hand. On the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all your troops and the nations with you. I will give you as food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. You will fall in the open field, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. I will send fire on Magog and on those who live in safety and the coastlands, and they will know that I am the Lord. So what new aspect of judgment was in this paragraph? Oh, the coastlands, yeah. So, well, it's not exactly, because it's not a woe, but, it's connected. He did mention judgment on the nations earlier. We had that long section against Tyre. That was 3 chapters, and there was another section we didn't read about Egypt, and that was 4 chapters, just denouncing them and promising their judgment. But also some hope at the very end for them. But here he's going to send fire on Magog and all the people who live far away who sent this invading army. So even though they stayed home and they weren't part of the battle, they're still going to be part of the punishment. That's what it's saying. And Gog himself, whoever this guy is. Now, after reading this chapter, if we ever get another dog, I want to name him Gog. I've never heard of, I think that would be a cool dog name. But anyway, verse 7, I will make known my holy name among my people Israel. I will no longer let my holy name be profaned, and the nations will know that I am the Lord and the Holy One in Israel. It is coming. It will surely take place, declares the sovereign Lord. This is the day I have spoken of. Makes himself holy, destroys the enemies with this terrible defeat. Now, when was a great enemy of Israel defeated? Can you think of any actual battles that this could be pointing to in history? It just in the history of Israel and the history of the church, is there any time when a great, ruthless, evil army was arrayed against God's people, and then God basically spared them through divine intervention? What were you saying? Oh yeah, that had already happened by this point, but yeah, you're right, when the Assyrians invaded and surrounded Jerusalem. So this did happen in their past. Did this ever happen later? Okay, you could kind of look at the Crusades. I bet at that time they considered this. And there were Christians in the Holy Land who were being protected. It wasn't, that was the reason for starting those Crusades.
Vikings used to come into the Mediterranean Sea, plunder all those countries they could.
Yeah. So God's delivered people on smaller scales, like he delivered people from the Vikings. In Lutheran history, have you heard of Gustavus Adolphus? Anybody? Yeah, there's a college named Gustavus Adolphus, and I don't remember the details that clearly right now, but basically during the 30 Years' Wars, which people always say, oh, they started the Reformation and people started fighting and religion just brings fighting. It's like, no, they started the Reformation and the Catholics started attacking, okay? It wasn't they started fighting. So the Catholics, their goal was to destroy the Reformation, and they nearly did it. And the 30 Years' War was kind of meant to punish and ruin and destroy Germany. And then they were almost destroyed, and then Sweden, the king of Sweden, who'd been neutral, decided to get involved, and he came in and he basically saved the day. And that prevented Lutheranism from being totally wiped out. And there were, cities where tens of thousands of people were killed in that 30 Years' War. It was horrible. It devastated Germany, and it was really just revenge for the Reformation. I mean, that's what it was. So there's kind of an example there. But yeah, if you don't see this as either Judgment Day or maybe just speaking spiritually about how God does destroy his enemies and protect his people, there's nothing in history you can point to that fits all these details in kind of a literal way. The one thing I was thinking, he did destroy the Babylonians and let the Persians take them over, and then the Persians sent them home, but that wasn't a battle that took place near Israel. So it's hard. This is coming. This is how God deals with his enemies. This is how God protects us, but it's hard to see any historical fulfillment of this right now. Verse 9, then those who live in the towns of Israel will go out and use the weapons for fuel and burn them up, the small and large shields, the bows and arrows, the war clubs and spears. For 7 years they will use them for fuel. They will not need to gather wood from the field or cut it from the forest, because they will use the weapons for fuel, and they will plunder those who plundered them and loot those who looted them, declares the sovereign Lord. That's a lot of weapons. You're burning it for 7 years. You don't even need any other firewood. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. On that day, I will give Gog a burial place in Israel in the valley of those who travel east to the sea. In the valley of those who travel east to the sea. It will block the way of travelers, because Gog and all his hordes will be buried there, so it will be called the Valley of Hamon Gog. For 7 months, the Israelites will be burying them in order to cleanse the land. Wow. All the people of the land will bury them, and the day I display my glory will be a memorable day for them, declares the sovereign Lord. People will be continually employed in cleansing the land. They will spread out across the land, along with others, and will bury any bodies that are lying on the ground. After 7 months, they will carry out a more detailed search. As they go through the land, anyone who sees a human bone will leave a marker beside it until the grave diggers bury it in the valley of Hamon Gog, near the town called Hamona, and so they will cleanse the land. Now that's very specific. I mean, that's very technical. Though they actually get into the process. Not just they're going to bury them, but they're going to actually have a team. You're going to have the people who go around and flag the bones, and then you're going to have a separate team of people burying the bones. Very detailed, unusual. 7 months, yeah. And for something that doesn't seem to have literally happened, for something that's a vision and symbolic, very interesting that this would be here. Yes?
I mean, the 7 years or the 7 months, is that symbolism?
It seems, yeah. I mean, I think you can say pretty safely it's symbolism, but the whole thing is symbolic. This literally doesn't seem like this ever happened or ever could the way the world is now. I mean, there's people who would want to say it could happen with modern Israel, but the problem is if it happened with modern Israel is not God's people, so it still wouldn't be fulfilling this. Modern Israel, one of the number one rules to be a citizen is you're not a Christian. You'd have to be a Jew. So there's no way, this is all seems to be symbolic. And if you think these details are remarkable, wait till we survey the next chapters, chapter 40 through 48. It gives and we're not going to read the whole thing, because it gives all these very precise and technical details for a new temple, and the new divisions of the land, and the new dimensions of the city of Jerusalem, and everything. And dimensions that are, I think, physically impossible. There's only so big a ceiling can be without the right kind of support. So this giant temple that the Lord's going to build, and that's also just symbolic. So he's using these stories, these visions in a symbolic way that is very similar to Revelation. Revelation's kind of taking this and continuing that mode of revelation. But yeah, so they're going to be burying the dead for 7 months, and they're going to be using the weapons for 7 years for fuel. Any thoughts as to why those details are here? I mean, I'll say at the front, they're probably not the main point. They're more adding texture, and they're supporting the main point of the chapter. But what are they doing? Okay.
That's pretty detailed. That's pretty thorough.
Yeah, okay. So it's showing God is in the details. Sure. I mean, it certainly shows God has a very detailed knowledge of the future, knowledge of history. When he prophesies, he doesn't just know generally what's going to happen, he knows precisely what's going to happen, down to the person, down to the minute. So yeah, you could think of that.
7 years probably means completeness.
Yeah, 7 seems to mean completeness. 7 days, God created the earth in 6 days and rested, and then that's the number that we get for our weeks. So, 7 is the divine number. So, showing that all this is God's plan, his doing. Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to be burning weapons, you're not saving them to use them again. So maybe it's like the end of the war.
Yeah, no more battle. There's a passage, turn your swords into plowshares and your spears into pruning hooks. So that idea, we don't need weapons anymore, no more fighting. Any other? Now, is this the last battle? A lot of people assume this is the end of the days and the very end times. They assume that just because it hasn't happened yet. Does that mean that there will be a battle like this that will bring an end to the age right before Judgment Day. Yeah.
There was, and that was the end of the earth as we know it. Why would they be going around flagging the bones and burying the bones?
Yeah. So the details of this chapter, it seems like life goes on. They are burying the bones, cleansing the lands, continuing to live. So it doesn't really sound like this is the great climactic battle that it is in Revelation. In Revelation, Gog and Magog are depicted as one final battle and then Judgment Day. Here, it's not really that. Yes? Well, I think just the way they're reading Scripture, he's asking why are there churches that do read it that way? Well, Revelation, they probably start there, and so that does depict it more. If you read it just in Revelation, it does seem like it happens, and then boom, right away Judgment Day. So then you read that into this, because it does use the word Gog and Magog, and so you assume it's talking about the same thing. But the underlying assumption is this is not symbolic language, this is not figurative or typological, it is an exact literal description of what's going to happen. And if so, then you have to take these things and harmonize them and make them fit. And so that's where I think that comes from. So maybe really quick, we didn't quite finish it. Let's see. Verses 17 through 20 is all an invitation for the birds and the animals to come. Verse 18, eat the flesh of the mighty men and drink the blood of the princes of the earth. So it's quite detailed, and we get the same details in the book of Revelation, and emphasizing the scope. But then starting with 21, I will display my glory among the nations, and all the nations will see the punishment I inflict and the hand I lay on them. From that day forward, the people of Israel will know that I am the Lord their God, and the nations will know that the people of Israel went into exile for their sin because they were unfaithful to me. So I hid my face from them and handed them over to their enemies, and they all fell by the sword. I dealt with them according to their uncleanliness and their offenses, and I hid my face from them. So now he's going back earlier. This is why I didn't protect them before, but now I'm really going to protect them. And this helps us understand what this would have meant for Ezekiel's audience. That they did have this worry, wait a minute, God didn't protect us. He let us be destroyed. He let us go into exile. How do we know that he's ever going to protect us again? So he's using this really powerful language and this striking imagery to show how violently and forcefully God will protect them going forward. Because now they have been punished for their sin. They have gone into exile. There's no more punishment for them. And then the last paragraph, 25. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will now restore the fortunes of Jacob and will have compassion on all the people of Israel, and I will be zealous for my holy name. They will forget their shame and all the unfaithfulness they showed toward me when they lived in safety in their land with no one to make them afraid. When I have brought them back from the nations and have gathered them from the countries of their enemies, I will be proved holy through them in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God. For though I sent them into exile among the nations, I will gather them to their own land, not leaving any behind. I will no longer hide my face from them, for I will pour out my spirit on the people of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord. And he's talked about pouring out his spirit and other stuff like that. All right, so that is, we had to go kind of quick because it's a long section, but now you know what it actually says and what it doesn't actually say. And if you're scrolling through Instagram and you see some guy who says, did you know that there's a chapter in the Bible that says there's going to be a great war with Russia and Iran? And now you'll know, wait a minute, they're overestimating their confidence in what this chapter is talking about. And there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of mystery, and the details don't really fit modern times if you look at the whole chapter. Any final thoughts on that or questions? But the comfort is God is going to protect us, and we really don't need to protect ourselves. He will protect us. That's hard for us to trust, hard for us to believe. We really feel like it's on us. And we're required to be responsible and to take care of those under our charge, but ultimately it is God who protects us and who brings downfall. If there's some nation that's filled with evil, some evil people in the world, God will judge them. He sees the evil, and maybe he's waiting longer than you want, but that judgment is coming, and it's going to be so horrible that you will pity them on the day that happens. Let's end there. Okay, well, got worship here at 10 o'clock.